Today's sharing will be on the Dhammapada study, chapter 6, which is the wise. Right? Dhammapada is actually the book of sayings by the Buddha. And in chapter 6, the Buddha discussed about who are the wise and how the wise should behave themselves and how we should look up to the wise. So there'll be a few stories. We're going to share Dhammapada verse number 76 until 79. So I hope you have downloaded this document, then you can follow the slides easily. Otherwise, it's okay. You can go along with it. All right. First, we're going to look at the first verse of chapter 6, where the Buddha spoke this verse at the Jetavana monastery. The Buddha spoke this verse with reference to a poor old Brahmin who became a monk called Venerable Rādha, or monk Rādha. Okay? So the Buddha said, should one find a person who points out faults and admonishes, let him follow such a wise and sagacious person, as one would a guide to hidden treasures. It is always an advantage and never a disadvantage to cultivate such an association. Simply put, the Buddha here was pointing out that wise people should do two things to help others. First, they should point out the faults of people who are doing the wrong things. In other words, the wise should point to people who are doing the wrong things and say, this is not right, this is not correct. And then the wise should also admonish. Here, admonish actually means training someone. Sometimes it may involve some kind of punishment, but it's not really punishment as in a big way. It's just a reprimand. That means telling that person, this is wrong, you should try harder to do it right. So it's really not a very strong way of punishing someone. It's just guiding someone to tell him how he can better himself. So when we come across such a person, wise and sagacious. Now this word sagacious, in case those of you who are not aware, the word sagacious means a person who is able to see right from wrong, who is able to discern good from bad. So wise people are like that. They have that ability, right? And it's always an advantage and never a disadvantage to cultivate such a association. That means friendship, right? So let's take a look at the story behind this verse, right? Rādha was a poor old Brahmin. That means he was coming from the caste of the Brahmin, people who actually have the capacity to become quite smart. So Brahmin are actually a higher caste. They are not the lower caste of workers, right? But it so happened that he's staying at the monastery and he's old and he's offering his services to the monks. So for doing things for the monk, like cooking, sweeping the floor, cleaning the place, washing the laundry, and all kinds of things he's doing at the monastery, for his services, he was provided free food and clothing and lodging and basic requisites. That means they repay him by providing him a place to stay and offering him food and so on, because he's poor and he's old. And unfortunately, he was discouraged from joining the Sangha. That means he was discouraged to become a monk, although he had very strong desire to become a monk. So he actually tried very hard. Day in and day out, he was trying to learn the things that the monks were learning. So he actually attended all the discourses, all the training, and tried to learn himself to become a monk. But they discouraged him. Now, early one morning, and this is what the Buddha often does these things. So every day, the Buddha, after finishing his early morning meditation, when he comes out of this meditation, he surveys the world. That means he looks around with his supernatural power, his third eye, And then he's able to see what's happening around him. And he saw this poor Brahmin, Rādha, right? Brahmin Rādha. And he recognized that because Brahmin Rādha tried so hard to want to become a monk, so the Brahmin Rādha actually had the inclination, had the energy, and had the willpower to become a monk. And in fact, the Buddha sensed that with proper guidance and training, he should be ready to even attain arahantship. So the Buddha recognized that. And so the Buddha went to the old man, went to this Brahmin Rādha, and learned from him that all the monks in the monastery did not want him to become a monk. They did not want him to join the Sangha. So for some reason, the other monks didn't quite look up to him. So the Buddha then summoned all the monks. He called all the monks to him and asked them, is there any monk here who recollects any good turn done to him by this old man, Rādha? So in other words, the Buddha was trying to ask all the monks, have you received any good services rendered by Brahmin Rādha? And of course, everybody has. And especially Venerable Sariputta, the chief disciple of the Buddha. And then Venerable Sariputta then went on to say, I do recollect an instance when this old man offered me spoonful of rice. That means when Venerable Sariputta was hungry or needed some food, so happened that Brahmin Rādha actually offered him food. And then the Buddha said, if that be so, shouldn't you help your benefactor to get liberated from the ills of life? That means Brahmin Rādha would be experiencing all kinds of dukkha, and he can free himself from dukkha if he is able to attain enlightenment. So the Buddha asked Sariputta to help out. And of course, Sariputta will fully agree to make the old man a monk and ordain him as a monk, and started to train the monk Rādha. Right? He's now Venerable Rādha. So Sariputta guided this old monk, and the old monk was very diligent. He followed the guidance very strictly. He never missed a beat. He did everything he was told, and he followed everything very strictly. And in fact, he was so good at it, he did so well that within a matter of days, this monk Rādha, Venerable Rādha, became an arahant. He had attained the ultimate arahantship. So it just only took him a few days. So when the Buddha next came to see the monks, they reported to the Buddha how this monk Rādha was so strictly following everything, right? And followed the guidance of Venerable Sariputta very strictly. So this Rādha was doing everything very well. So the Buddha then, of course, replied to all the monks that monks should be amenable to guidance like Rādha, and should not resent when rebuked for any fault or failing. Which means all the monks should listen and be attentive to any guidance or training or instruction or even reprimand. And when that happens, the monks should not resent. The monks should just understand and practice the right thing. So having said thus, with reference to Venerable Rādha, the Buddha then concluded with this statement. He says, monks, when a fault is pointed out to a monk, he ought to be amenable to discipline, like Rādha, and when he is admonished, he should not take offense. So these are two very important aspects of learning from the wise. And in fact, these are also two very important aspects of how the wise should train the people under them. And amenable and admonished. Amenable simply means that the person, the student or the pupil, is open and responsive to suggestions. Right? Open means is willing to listen, willing to pay attention, willing to learn something. So open is a willingness, wanting to accept and embrace whatever has been taught to them. Responsive is then to take the responsibility to do something about it. So here the Buddha taught the monks should be like that, amenable, just like the way Rādha had performed. And of course, it was very obvious that because Rādha became enlightened within a matter of days, now everybody realized that Venerable Rādha actually did a great job in learning, understanding, and responding to all the guidance. The other word, admonish. Admonish is something which the teacher or the wise person should be doing. It is a strong and firm reprimand. Not really, it's not really the punishment, it's just reprimand, telling person, you done this wrong, you must correct yourself. In other words, it is a very strong and firm instruction to the person who is learning, to the pupil. So these are the two important aspects of how we can actually rise above our normal self and become enlightened. That is to be amenable, open and responsive to suggestion by the wise, and to accept being admonished, which is strong and firm reprimand, and not actually take offense, right? And not resent and not get angry. Realize that when the wise people are teaching you something, it is something good for you. So this is really what the message of the Buddha. So therefore, that's why the Buddha stated this verse, verse 76, right? And one of the things that is mentioned here, right, should one find such a person who points out faults and admonishes, let him follow a wise and sagacious person as one would a guide to hidden treasures. So here the Buddha pointed out that when the wise is teaching you, the wise is actually pointing you to hidden treasures that you can discover yourself, right? And therefore it is always advantageous to associate with such a wise person. So this hidden treasure, what the Buddha was actually referring to is when the Arahant teaches you something, he's helping you to cultivate and attain your boundless potential to become fully awakened. And because Venerable Rādha followed the instructions of Sariputta, in a matter of days, he became enlightened. So this is the story behind verse number 76. The verse looks very straightforward, but the story is very interesting. That an old Brahmin who just joined the Sangha in a matter of days can become enlightened. So this is actually very inspiring, very motivating to realize that people, it can happen to such an old person. Now let's look at the next verse where the Buddha spoke about the role of a wise person. And the Buddha uttered this verse while residing at the Jetavana monastery, the main monastery where the Buddha normally resides and teaches most of the time. The Buddha spoke this verse with reference to, now it's the opposite, two monks who are very undisciplined. They never behave themselves, they never follow the rules. So the Buddha actually pointed out the role of a wise person when dealing with these monks who are not disciplined. And these two monks, Venerable Asaji and Venerable Puna Bhaksuka, they don't follow the rules properly. So the verse is that the wise one should admonish others. He should give advice and should prevent others from doing wrong. Such a man is held dear by the good. He is disliked by the bad. That means a wise person. Now, to put this into context, in this Dhammapada chapter 6, when the Buddha spoke about the wise person, he was basically referring to the Arahants. That means a person who has already become enlightened. Of course, typically the classic example of the wise person would be the chief disciple, Moggallānas and Sariputta. So here the Buddha pointed out that the wise person should admonish. That means reprimand people who are doing wrong. And then advise them. Not only advise them, to help them not do wrong again. Prevent others from doing wrong. This is the role of a wise person. And such a person, the good people should always respect and revere. Right? That's why the word revere is where the word reverend comes from, or the same venerate, venerable. So such a person should be respected and revered by others. So people with a good mind, they will be happy to listen to such a person. But of course, there are people who cannot be corrected, who refuse to be corrected. They will dislike the wise. I mean, they will criticize the wise, they will not accept the advice from the wise, and they will not change their ways. Right? So this verse was spoken by the Buddha to explain the role of a wise person. And here is the story behind it, about these two monks who were very indisciplined. Right? Venerable Asaji and Venerable Puna Basuka. Together with a group of other monks, they were all pupils of chief disciples. They were not direct students of the Buddha. And they were staying in a small monastery far away from the Buddha's main monastery in Jetavana Monastery. And this small little village called Kitagiri is a small little monastery. So these two monks, they think that they can get away with doing it their own way. And one of the things they did was they planted fruit trees for their own personal consumption. That means because they are away from the Buddha, they thought, oh, they can do what they like. So they started planting fruit trees, and then they pluck the fruits whenever they wanted to eat. All these are actually not very wholesome habits, because these habits make people cultivate greed and lust. So this is what the Buddha was trying to prevent. So these two monks were doing these kind of things. And not only that, they also violated various precepts, right? Monks' precepts. And they also made a lot of noise, and they were disturbing other people. So they created a very unconducive environment for other monks. So people trying to cultivate, they get distracted by what these two monks were doing. So this is not good. They were doing wrong together also with other monks. But these two are what we call in Chinese 大鬼頭, big head, right? The people who do the worst things. They are the leaders of the bad, or the leaders of the unwholesome, right? Undisciplined ones. So on hearing this, the Buddha realized something was going on, because, you know, as I said, every morning after the Buddha comes out of his early morning meditation, he scans everywhere to see what's happening. And obviously, the Buddha has the ability to see what's going on at Kitagiri, this monastery at Kitagiri, small little village. So the Buddha realized what happened and sent his two chief disciples, Sariputta and Moggallānas, to go and help them, to admonish and instruct those who would not listen, and to expel those, to admonish and instruct those who would be willing to listen, and then expel those who refuse to listen. So they are given instructions. Go and reprimand them, teach them, instruct them. If they listen, that's good. If they don't listen, expel them from the holy order. So Sariputta and Moggallānas went ahead. And when they arrived there and started admonishing and instructing the monks, most of these indisciplined monks, they corrected their ways, they corrected themselves, they realized they have done wrong. So they listened and they responded, and they corrected themselves and no longer misbehave. Some of them who couldn't take it, they basically disrobed, they returned to householder life. But there are others who did not disrobe, but they refused to accept. They were kicked out, they were expelled from the holy order. And this is really the role of the wise. the role of the teacher to admonish and to instruct. And that's why the Buddha spoke that verse. The wise should admonish others, he should give advice and prevent others from doing wrong. And in so doing, such a wise person is held dear by the good. That means good people understand that this wise person is helping them. So good people will revere such a wise person. But at the same time, those who don't listen, those who cannot correct themselves, the bad ones, they will dislike the teachers. They will dislike the wise. So this is really the verse that the Buddha uttered, the role of the wise. That is verse 77. Now let's take a look at verse 78, where the Buddha pointed out to cultivate good friendship. This is a very interesting story because while residing in Jetavana monastery, here the Buddha spoke this verse referring to Channa. Channa, if some of you will remember the name, Channa was the former charioteer. That means the one who takes care of the horses. When the Buddha before he became enlightened, he was Prince Siddhattha. So Channa was the one helping the Buddha and also helping Prince Siddhattha and the chief attendant to Prince Siddhattha, taking care of the horses, taking care of Prince Siddhartha's personal needs. Channa joined the Sangha after Prince Siddhattha became enlightened as the Buddha. Right? So this is the story of Channa. Now, unfortunately, due to Channa's very strong ego and his attachment to his previous role as the chief attendant and charioteer to Prince Siddhattha, he rated himself too highly. So he had a very strong ego. If you remember, so this is basically Channa helping Prince Siddhattha before he became enlightened. In fact, it was Channa who did quite a lot for Prince Siddhattha. Here, the Buddha uttered this verse in reference to Channa. He says, associate not with evil friends, associate not with mean men, associate with good friends, associate with noble men. So here, basically, the Buddha was trying to point out to people, you should avoid unwholesome people, right? Stay away from the fools and associate with wise people. That's really what it is. But there's a very interesting story behind it. Going back before the Buddha became enlightened, when he was Prince Siddhattha, Channa was the one, as you can see in the picture, the charioteer, he was the one showing Buddha, or rather showing Prince Siddhattha in those days, what is happening out there in the villages, because Prince Siddhattha was living a sheltered life. His father did not want him to go out. So Channa was the one who took him out and showed him an old man. And that's when Prince Siddhattha realized that I too can get old. Channa showed him a sick man. And that's when Prince Siddhattha realized I too can get sick. And of course, Channa showed the dead corpse. And there, Prince Siddhattha realized that one day I too will die. And of course, then Channa showed him an ascetic or a monk. And that's when Prince Siddhattha realized that the only way he can discover the truth is to give up, right, home life, give up the life in palace and go out and seek the truth and go out and practice and stay away from all the luxurious environment he was in. So in that sense, Prince Siddhattha owed a lot to Channa. So Prince Siddhattha had many reasons to be very grateful to Channa for helping him to see all these things. And because of this, Prince Siddhattha went out and practiced asceticism and found two teachers. Eventually, on his own, he finally became enlightened and became the Sammasambuddha. So in that sense, the Buddha had a lot to be grateful to Channa. And after he became enlightened, Channa also left the palace and joined the Holy Sangha to become a monk. But of course, Channa, looking back, realizing that he did all these wonderful things for Prince Siddhattha, or he did all these things for the Buddha before the Buddha became enlightened. So he was very conceited, right? Thinking that everybody should look up to him because he was the one who helped the Buddha become enlightened, so to speak. That's what he thought. So as you can see here, the Channa in the background, the one who was the charioteer to Prince Siddhattha, and who then helped him to leave home and cultivate on himself. So the story is that Channa was very stubborn, very conceited, and full of ego. So Channa, who was the attendant who accompanied Prince Siddhattha when he renounced the world and left the palace on horseback, when the prince attained Buddhahood and became the Sammasambuddha, then Channa followed him. And Channa joined the Holy Sangha and became a monk himself. But during the time when Channa had become a monk, he was very arrogant. He was very stubborn. He was trying to show off. He was trying to prove that he helped the Buddha so much that people should all look up to him because of his past connections with the Buddha before the Buddha was enlightened. So he thought that, since the Buddha owed me something, he thought that the Buddha should be grateful to him, and therefore he behaved in such a way. Of course, the Buddha was grateful to Channa, and for that reason, the Buddha also tried his very best not to punish Channa too much. So Channa would go around and say things like, "I came along with my master when he left the palace for the forest. At that time, I was the only companion of my master, and there was no one else." And the way he put it was that everybody else should look up to him. In fact, so much so that he even mistreated Sariputta and Moggallana's. So now Sariputta and Moggallana's are the Buddha's chief disciples, but Channa became very envious because Channa thought that I should be the chief disciple. So Channa became very envious and resentful and started mistreating Sariputta and Moggallana's. That was how bad it was. Channa was really a very nasty guy during that time. So the Buddha tried to teach him. When the Buddha sent for him and admonished him, reprimanded him for his behavior, Channa kept silent. He didn't say anything. He kept quiet. But after he left the Buddha, then he continued to do the same thing all over again. That means when the Buddha summoned him, he would just keep quiet and listen to the Buddha's admonishment and also the Buddha's instruction. But as soon as the Buddha has finished, he turned around, he then misbehaved all over again. So he continued to abuse and taunt the two chief disciples, Moggallana's and Sariputta. The Buddha tried so many times, right? The Buddha never gave up, just kept trying to train him, but he just wouldn't listen. He just refused to change. Sometimes people's ego is so strong. No matter what you say, no matter what you do, how much you try to help, they will not change. It's their style is almost permanently in concrete. They won't give up. So here is a classic example where Channa just refused to change. He continued to behave in this very unwholesome way. Now, this is also a very important point. In a lot of other religions, I'm not criticizing any religions, but I'm just pointing out that in a lot of other religions, they say that the sage, or the one who is the head of the religion, like for example, in Christianity, then you're talking about Jesus Christ, right? So in Islam, you're talking about Muhammad, and in other religions, you'll be talking about the head of the order. In other religions, that such a person tried to change the world. But here, you can see the Buddha never tried to change the world. The Buddha actually just wanted to teach people, wanted to guide people. He would not hesitate to admonish anyone. He would not hesitate to reprimand them. But at the same time, the Buddha will always instruct them, and guide them. Whether a person changes or not, it is up to that person. But the Buddha is not there to change the world. The Buddha is there to teach people how to change themselves. And this is also why we call Buddhism a humanistic religion, because we talk about every human has the potential to become a better person. So therefore, it is up to each and every one of us to listen to the wise and follow the instructions of the wise. Right? So in this case here, Channa never learned. He just refused to change. And the Buddha tried to explain to him about the two chief disciples. So the Buddha continuously reminded Channa and said, Channa, these two noble monks are good friends to you. You should associate with them and be on good terms with them. So the Buddha kept advising to Channa that these are two wise monks that you should always associate with and try to be good friends with them. The Buddha kept trying to teach Channa, but Channa just refused to change. In spite of this repeated advice by the Buddha, Channa just refused to change. So now the Buddha thought about it deeply. And, the Buddha has the ability to see not only his past lives, but he, I think, could also see a little bit into the future. And he saw that Channa was capable of changing, but only after the Buddha had passed. So in other words, the Buddha had realized that Channa would change only after the Buddha's parinibbana. That means the Buddha realized that during the Buddha's lifetime, Channa would not change. But once the Buddha is gone, the Buddha could see that by that time, Channa will change. So the Buddha came up with an idea how to help Channa to speed up that change, knowing that it will only happen after the Buddha is gone. So the Buddha knew when he was going. On the eve of his parinibbana, the night before he would pass on, the Buddha summoned Venerable Ananda. Now realize by that time, the chief disciples are no more there, right? So the Buddha summoned Venerable Ananda to his bedside and instructed Venerable Ananda, after parinibbana, impose this strict admonishment, right? This punishment on Channa. It's called the Brahmadanda punishment, right? This is actually the strongest thing anyone can do to a monk. And this is really only done by the teacher. So here, the teacher, the Buddha, gave the instruction that Venerable Ananda will implement this punishment on Channa after the Buddha has passed. So this is basically like telling all the monks to ignore him and not invite him to anything. It's actually putting him in deep freeze, It is a kind of very subtle punishment. It's the highest penalty imposed on a practicing monk, applying what is called social boycott, virtually declaring such a person as a social outcast, which means after the Buddha has passed, Venerable Ananda would pronounce that the Buddha gave this instruction, Brahmadanda, and impose it on Channa, and all the monks will ignore Channa, all the monks will boycott Channa, and Channa will never be invited to anything. He will be left alone. He will feel very lonely. This is the punishment that the Buddha basically instructed Venerable Ananda to impose upon Channa, the Brahmadanda punishment. So after the Buddha passed, then Venerable Ananda announced that the Buddha's instruction. And Channa realized, oh, this is not good. Channa realized that now the Buddha wanted Ananda to reprimand him. by imposing this punishment. Channa realized that since the Buddha is gone, there's no one else who can protect him anymore. There's no one else he can hide behind, and continue to behave in his terrible ways. So he felt a sense of remorse, and with a deep and bitter remorse, he felt very bad about it. He realized that he had done wrong. This is good because in a way, now Channa realized that all this while Buddha was alive, Channa had gotten away with it because the Buddha was trying, well, not really to protect him, but the Buddha did not want to be too hard on him because in a way, the Buddha was grateful to Channa for all the good things that that Channa did while the Buddha was Prince Siddhattha. So now that the Buddha is gone, Channa no longer has the excuse or the opportunity to tell people that he is the one who brought the Buddha around, He realized how wrong he was. So in the presence of all the monks, he finally admitted his mistakes. And he asked for pardon because I think he finally woke up. It was a wake-up call. So he finally realized how wrong he was because he realized that now the Buddha is gone. There's no longer the Buddha who can teach him or help him. So he felt quite sad about it. So thereafter, he started to change his ways. And then he started to obey and follow instructions of all the teachers. There are still a few senior disciples who are teaching. So he realized that he must then follow the wise and follow the instructions. And he actually started practicing meditation very seriously. And in fact, he did so well, eventually, believe it or not, Channa became an Arahant. So by working very hard, Channa finally became an Arahant. Despite all his past mistakes, he was able to correct himself. And this is because after the Buddha has gone, he started to associate with the wise people and learn from them and follow the instructions and practice his meditation very strictly and finally became an Arahant. That's why the Buddha uttered this verse that associate not with evil friends, associate not with mean men, associate with good friends, associate with noble men. And this term, associate with good friends, is what we call Kalyana Mitra. So we all have Kalyana Mitra, the people who share our spiritual aspirations, and together we practice with them. So it's very important in our life, in our spiritual life especially, if we really want to get far, we should not try to just practice alone. We should associate with wise people. We should also associate with people, like-minded people, people who share the same spiritual aspiration, the Kalyana Mitra. And together we can practice and help each other. So this is one way that the Buddha has pointed out that we can help each other. So Kalyana Mitra, it's very important that we associate with good friends and like-minded people with the same aspirations, and we practice together. Now we come to the next verse, living happily in the Dhamma. So while residing at the Jetavana monastery, the Buddha spoke this verse. This is the last verse in our series here. The Buddha spoke this verse with reference to Venerable Mahakapina. Mahakapina was once upon a time a king of a small little country called Kukutavati. So he was a king. And this is the story of him. And the Buddha uttered this verse. So let's take a look at the story. Mahakapina was the king of Kukutavati. And he had a beautiful queen, Anoja. So together they ruled the kingdom. And he also had a lot of very loyal ministers. This was a good king. That's why his ministers were very faithful to him, very diligent to help him. run the country. So Mahakapina, together with his 1,000 ministers who helped him rule the country. And it was very successful. They were prosperous. Mahakapina actually is a very wise king, a lot of wisdom and able to think clearly. So one day while he and his ministers were out in the park, strolling around, sort of surveying the country, they came across a group of merchants who just came from Savatthi. Savatthi is where the Buddha resided with the majority of his Sangha, majority of the monks. So they came across a group of merchants who had just come from Savatthi, Jetavana monasteries in there. So the Mahakapina learned from these merchants that there is such a person called the Buddha, and there is the triple gem, right? The Buddha, his teaching, and the community of his followers. And the king, together with his ministers, learned about that, and they were very inspired because they heard so many good things. They were very inspired. They wanted to find out and learn from such a teacher. So immediately the whole group of them, the king, together with 1,000 of his ministers, they set out to Savatthi to seek out the Buddha and the Sangha. So together they went. And of course, as I mentioned, every day when the Buddha comes out of his meditation early in the morning, he surveys the world with his supernatural power, his third eye, and see things that are happening. And he saw Mahakapina and his ministers are now heading towards Savatthi, towards him. So the Buddha realized that, oh, this group is coming, and the Buddha knew that they had noble intentions. The Buddha knew that these are good people, wise people who have good intentions. And in fact, the Buddha even went on to surmise that given the proper guidance, they would be ready for arahantship. That means because of their good heart, kind-heartedness, because of their noble intentions and their diligence to want to do good and be good and learn the good things, they were basically ready to become arahants. So the Buddha sensed that. So what did the Buddha do? The Buddha decided to go out towards them. Instead of waiting for them in Savatthi, the Buddha went towards them. And halfway, the Buddha came to a banyan tree. And then the Buddha sat under the banyan tree to meditate, waiting for the arrival of Mahakapina and his 1,000 ministers. So when King Mahakapina and his ministers arrived, they saw the Buddha. And because King Mahakapina had good intentions and a kind heart, due to the fact that he had a pure heart, he was able to see rays radiating from the body of the Buddha, 6 colored rays radiating from his body. See, this is not something anybody can see. It's only people who are good people can see this. So because of the good heart of King Mahakapina and his ministers, all having common aspirations, spiritual aspirations, they all saw these 6 colored rays radiating from the body of the Buddha. Then they realized who he was. And of course, they approached the Buddha and paid homage. And usually when that happens, they always ask the Buddha for some teachings, discourse. So the Buddha decided to give them a discourse. The Buddha realized that they are ready. The King Mahakapina and his ministers are ready to listen to a good discourse. So the Buddha delivered this first discourse to them. After listening to the discourse, the king and all his ministers actually attained the first stage of arahantship, that is Sotapanna fruition, or becoming Sotapan. So they actually became Sotapan immediately after listening to the first discourse from the Buddha. And when they realize that, when they become Sotapan, they realize, they know that they had become Sotapan. And then they asked the Buddha if they could join the Sangha. So they asked Buddha for permission to join the Holy Sangha. And of course, the Buddha realized that that is the right thing to do. Because when the Buddha reflected on their past and realizing that these are noble and intelligent and wise and good people, and in one of their past lives, they had done good for the Sangha in their past lives. So the Buddha welcomed them. Now, this is also one of the important things about the Buddha having these three powers, or three powers, tevijja, three knowledges. The Buddha is able to see his own past life, and he's also able to see other people's past lives. And he's also able to see how things come to be, how things are transitioning, right? Cause and effect. So the Buddha is able to see the past lives of King Mahakapina and his ministers, and realize that in their past lives, they had revered the yellow robes. They had revered, right, by offering the monks food or whatever. So therefore, the Buddha welcomed them to become monks. So now they became monks. All of them are monks. And they have all attained the first stage of arahantship, and that is Sotapan. So now they are Sotapan monks. Now the story gets more interesting. Queen Anoya heard that, oh, the king is gone. The king left together with all the 1,000 ministers. They had gone to Savatthi looking for the Buddha and all that. So King Anoya realized what is happening. And so she summoned the wives of all the 1,000 ministers who had left. So in other words, now these are all the ladies left alone. Husbands are gone. And they didn't know what had happened yet. They just realized that they had gone towards Savatthi. So together they decided to follow the king's trail. They don't know yet that that they have all become monks. But now they just want to find out what's going on. So they decided to follow. And they also presumably had good intentions, noble intentions, to want to learn something. So they went towards Savatthi. Of course, halfway there, they came across the Buddha. And they too came to the place where the Buddha was. And again, because of their pure heart, because of their noble intentions, they were able again to see the halo of 6 colors radiating from the Buddha's body. And they recognized that this is a very special person. The Buddha is a very special person. And then they paid homage to the Buddha. At that point, they haven't come across their husbands yet. They had just seen the Buddha first. And the Buddha was very smart. All this time, the Buddha was using exercising his supernatural power to make the king and his ministers invisible, all of them invisible, so that their wives would not see them. So in other words, when the wives came to this place, everybody was gathered, the wives were not able to see the husbands. Maybe the husbands just remained silent. And the Buddha exercised his supernatural power so that the wives were not able to see the husbands. Then the wives, of course, as usual, they asked the Buddha for some discourse. The queen, together with all the wives, started to ask, where's the king? Where are the ministers? And of course, the Buddha told them, well, don't worry, you will see them shortly. You will see them soon. So told the queen and her party of the wives of all the ministers to just wait for a little while, be patient. And the king will soon appear together with the ministers. Right? And now, of course, the Buddha decided to deliver a discourse to the ladies. And of course, when the Buddha was delivering this discourse to the ladies, the king and his ministers were also listening in silently. You know, because they had joined the Sangha, and they are now Sangha members, the king and his ministers, they would be keeping very quiet in a meditative pose. Therefore, the queen and the wives will not notice. So the Buddha delivered this second discourse. And again, at the end of this second discourse, an amazing thing happened. The king and all his ministers attained arahantship. They actually became enlightened. And the queen and all the wives attained the first fruition, Sotapatti. So it's amazing. So now the queen and the wives of all the ministers are now Sotapan. Right? And at that point, they began to be able to see their husbands. At that instant, the queen and her party saw the newly admitted monks and recognized them as their former husbands. Realized that by now, the king and his ministers are already become monks. They have shaven their heads. So in other words, they don't look the same anymore. They would be in robes and they would have shaven their heads. So the queen now realized that, oh, these are all our husbands. So the queen and all the ladies realized that the husbands have all become monks. So they can no longer be wives, right? And the ladies realized that they themselves have become Sotapan. And therefore, they asked the Buddha for permission to enter the Sangha as well, to become nuns, to become bhikkhunis. But the Buddha, of course, instead of ordaining them on the spot, the Buddha directed them to go ahead. You go to Savatthi, and there you will be admitted to the order of the Sangha. So they left. And when the queen and all the wives arrived at Savatthi, they then joined the Sangha. And after they had joined the Sangha, sometime later, of course, not immediately, during the course of their training, later on, they all became enlightened. They attained arahantship. So this is really the story of this living happily in the Dhamma. But this is not the end yet, right? Now comes the last part. Everybody is now staying at Jetavana Monastery. And now Mahakapina is no longer king. He is now an arahant, Venerable Mahakapina. So Venerable Mahakapina was so happy that he had attained arahantship, that he was a very jovial person. So every day he would go around day and night happily exclaiming this phrase, Aho Sukham, Aho Sukham. Basically, it means, oh, what happiness. Oh, I'm very happy. I'm so happy. So he was declaring how happy he was to eventually become an arahant. He had attained that. This is a happiness not founded on pleasures. This is a happiness founded on spiritual attainment. So in other words, you could say this is the state of the Brahma Vihara called mudita, right? Mudita is this state of spiritual happiness, not founded on pleasures, but founded on spiritual attainment. So Venerable Mahakapina every day goes around declaring Aho Sukham, Aho Sukham. So all the monks were very curious. Why this guy goes around so happily declaring that? So the monks, hearing him saying it so many times in a day, they went and reported to the Buddha and said, oh, this Venerable Mahakapina keeps going around saying Aho Sukham, what's happening? So the Buddha replied to them. He says, and of course the Buddha referred to his students or disciples as his so-called children. He says, my son Kapina, having had the taste of the Dhamma, lives happily with a serene mind. He's saying these words of exaltation repeatedly with reference to Nibbana. Because Mahakapina had now attained the highest and most supreme bliss. And in his moment of bliss, his moment of happiness, he would declare and utter these words of exaltation. So that's the explanation of the Buddha, that Mahakapina is so happy, right, having attained this spiritual attainment, that he utters it as in a very blissful way. Right? So this is the fourth verse in that chapter 6, where the Buddha said, "He who drinks in the Dhamma lives happily with a serene mind. The wise ever delights in the Dhamma revealed by the Noble One." Here, the Noble One was referring to the Buddha. So the Buddha was the one who taught them the Dhamma. And anyone who learns the Dhamma and who gains cultivation and attainment, who attains higher level of spiritual attainment, they would experience a very serene mind and a very deep happiness. Right? And this is a happiness founded on spiritual attainment, not on pleasures. So these are the 4 verses in the chapter number 6 called The Wise. Maybe in the next sharing, I will do more verses. But now let's take a look at these 4 verses in Pali. I'm very happy to report that Venerable Indaratana, many of you would remember him. He was originally in Sentu Temple for a long time. Then he moved to Subang Jaya and became one of the resident monks at SJBA, Subang Jaya. And since 2019, he had returned back to Sri Lanka. So he's now residing in Sri Lanka. In fact, he has his own monastery now, or he has his own place now. So you can go to Facebook and look him up, and you will see what he's doing there. And he is my Kalyana Mitra. We have spent a lot of time happily together, sharing a lot of things. And I was very fortunate. During the time that I spent with him, I was able to record his chanting, special chanting on Dhammapada. So now I'm going to share with you his Dhammapada chanting of verse 76, 77, 78, and 79. So I hope you will enjoy this.
Nidinang pavantarang yang pansi vanjadan sinang ninggai hevading medaving tadisang panditang baji tadisang bhajamanansa seyo hoti napapiyo ovadeyanusaseya asangbaca nivaraye satang hi sopiyo hoti asatang hoti ampiyo nabaje papake minti nabaje puri sadame bajith minti kalyani bajith puri suntame Dhamma piti sukhang seti vimpasannena cetasa ariyam pavedite dhamme sadaramati pandito
Right. Now I would like to share with you a video where Bhante Punaji explained about the wise people, the Arahants, those who had become Arahants. And these are the people that the Buddha called the wise.
Does Arahants achieve the perfection in goodness?
Whether the Arahant can reach the state of perfection?
Yeah.
Well, the word Arahant really means one who has reached perfection. So there is nothing more to be done. The Buddha is also an Arahant. That's why we say, Itipiso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho. The Arahang means, we have to understand this word Arahang. Ara means a fetter. Fetter means a bond. Bond. That if you take a rope and tie a person, that rope is Ara. Ara means the rope. Hang means to break that rope. Because we are tied to the concept of existence or being. We think, we are dreaming that we are existing. So that existence itself is the problem. Because the Buddha spoke of existence, the word that he used was bhava. Existence is bhava. And so we have to awaken from that dream of existence. So the word Buddha means one who has awakened. So, but to awaken, we have to break the bonds that we are tied to this concept of existence. So, Arahant, Samma Sambuddho means the one who has broken the bonds and awakened from the dream of existence. So the word Arahant. But you see, it is the Mahayanists who started trying to distinguish between the Arahant and the Bodhisattva. That is another long story. I have to explain. You see, this Mahayana and Theravada was not there at the beginning. It was 100 years after the Buddha that there was what is called the second council. And it is at that second council that the followers of the Buddha broke up into two, the Theras and the Mahasangha. Mahasangha, that means after the Buddha had passed away, there were lot of other people who became disciples of the Buddha just because the disciples of the Buddha were treated well by the people. But although they became disciples of the Buddha, they were not really interested in following the teachings of the Buddha. They were only interested in getting the benefits from the lay followers. So they proposed we should break some of these rules or modify the rules to make it easier for us. The Theras were the elders. The elders began to say, no, we cannot break the rules laid down by the Buddha. Then those people said, In that case, we'll take a vote. So they voted. And who won? Those who want to break the rules won. So those who won became the Mahasangha. And the elders who said we cannot break the rules, they began to be called the Theras. The Theras are the elders, and the younger people who wanted to break the rules, they separated as the Mahasangha because they won the vote. So the problem came because they were depending on the lay people for the benefits. And if the lay people think, oh, these are the people who wanted to break the rules laid down by the Buddha, so we will not serve them. So they are losing that way. So there was a wise monk who said, don't worry, we'll explain to the layman why we wanted to break the rules. So he came out and said, well, you know these Theras, the senior monks, they want to follow the rules. For what purpose? They want to become arahants. Becoming an arahant is reaching that state of perfection. That is the meaning of becoming an arahant, breaking the bonds. And they said, we don't want to become arahants. We want to become Buddhas. When they said that, these lay followers, they didn't know much about Buddhism, so they thought, well, becoming a Buddha is better than becoming an Arahant. Then we'll help them, we'll serve them. And then they said, if you want to become a Buddha, you don't have to follow the Vinaya rules. You only have to practice the paramitas. So we'll be practicing the paramitas to become Buddhas. So the lay followers began to help them, support them. That is how they broke up into two. The Mahayana means the great vehicle, Mahayana. And they call the Theravadins Hinayana, small vehicle. Why? Because the Hinayana was like the motorcycle. And the Mahayana, the great vehicle, was like a bus. Because the Buddha can take people in the bus, means a lot of people, and enlighten them. And the Theravada, the small vehicle like the motorcycle, was able only to take one person. You see, so they thought, oh, the great vehicle is better than the small vehicle, and that is how they supported. And from that time onwards, the Mahayanas were really following, they were saying that they are trying to become Buddhas, and they were Bodhisattvas because they were trying to become Buddhas. And they were following the paramitas. But the lay people didn't realize the difference between the Vinaya rules and the paramitas. They didn't know that. It was, paramitas were very difficult things to do because you have to sacrifice your life, you have to sacrifice many things to practice the paramitas. And if a person can't practice the Vinaya rules, how can they practice paramitas? They didn't know that. So what happened was, these two parties went on in that way. That is how ultimately Buddhism gradually started degenerating till the present times, when we have not only Theravada and Mahayana, we are also having another one called Vajrayana.
Okay, that ends my presentation. I hope you have benefited from it. So thank you very much. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Now I have some slides. I told you before, these slides you can download. KCBA-the Wise. This is, of course, the slides that I have shown in this presentation. But I've also uploaded another document you can download, tiny.cc/commentary-the Wise. This is actually Dhammapada commentary by Venerable Rādha, where all the stories and translations of the verses are there, so you will get all that. So please take note of these two links and download these two documents. And if you have any questions after all these sessions are over, please feel free to email me or contact me through Facebook. Meanwhile, let us take a look at what are the questions that may be posted today. Anyone can become a Sotapan. Sotapan does not require a person to renounce fully. So basically, there has been many known Sotapans even before they became monk. And if you look at the story that we went through this time, in fact, everybody had become a Sotapan before he became a monk, right? Okay, so it was only after they became Sotapan that they requested to become monks. So it is possible. In fact, as far as I understood from my teacher, Bhante Punaji, right up to the first three levels, that means the Sotapan, the Sakadagami, and the Anagami, these do not require the person to fully renounce, although renunciation will help. A person who becomes a monk has renounced from home life, then that person would have a greater possibility and opportunity to attain these levels. But for the Sotapan, Sakadagami, and Anagami, the first three stages, they don't require the people to become a monk. But as far as I understand, if you want to become enlightened, then if you're not, if you are still experiencing home life, the chances of becoming enlightened would be much slimmer, because you would still be exposed to a lot of worldly temptations. Therefore, you really have to put yourself in a situation where you are completely free from all these temptations, then you have a better chance of becoming enlightened. So those who are not monks, they have less likelihood. I'm not saying it can't be, but less likelihood of attaining arahantship. Okay.